sunny spaces, smiling faces, happy places. But every sunny space holds a shadow. Behind every smile are sharp teeth, and every happy place has something sinister lurking just below the surface.
Welcome to We Saw the Devil, the podcast diving deep into the chilling realms of true crime. Join your host Robin as she unravels mysteries that have left investigators baffled and armchair sleuths obsessed. Be forewarned, dear listener. We Saw the Devil is not for the faint of heart. Our unflinching exploration will take you to the darkest corners of the psyche and through the unimaginable depths of human darkness to unearth stark secrets to the harsh light of day. Nothing will be left untouched. Are you ready? Are you sure? We saw the devil.
Hey guys, it's Robin. And I want to know, how old were you when you first heard the rumor that Marilyn Manson removed a few of his own ribs so that he could perform fellatio on himself? I think I was in the 5th grade, somewhere around there. And it seems like the rumor mill would never ever change. Sexual assault, mental and physical abuse, Satanism, torture, inspiration behind one of the most tragic watershed moments in a now lengthy history of American school shootings. Known for pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and challenging our own preconceptions, Marilyn Manson has spent decades crafting a really unique persona that transcends music. He's a musician, an actor, and most significantly, a cultural lightning rod for controversy. Now, admittedly, I haven't followed Marilyn Manson for a very, very long time. Honestly, I don't think I ever did because I don't like his music. All I know is that he's had various cameos in random TV shows and movies, but I haven't listened to him since I was about 12 years old. But in terms of following Manson, that changed when Evan Rachel Wood, Marilyn's ex-partner and an actress best known for her roles in films or shows like 13, Westworld, and my favorite, Across the Universe, came out and made veiled allegations against an abusive ex-boyfriend. And everyone just automatically assumed that it was probably Manson that she was referring to, but she would in fact go on later to publicly name him, and then the media floodgates opened. Other women would surface and claim that Manson had assaulted them as well. He would be on the receiving end of multiple lawsuits, with many of them still ongoing today. And that's what this episode is about. Marilyn Manson's legal issues, from allegations, arrests, and ongoing lawsuits. So we're just going to start right from the beginning. And the beginning is 1989. 20-year-old Brian Warner and some friends start a band and call it Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. As I'm sure most of you are aware, Brian Warner chose the stage name Marilyn Manson by combining Marilyn from Marilyn Monroe with Manson of Charles Manson. In his autobiography, he claims that the name is, quote, an apt symbol for modern-day America. Everyone has a light and dark side, and neither can exist without the other. And the aesthetic, both musically and visually, was established pretty much right out of the gate. There's influence of David Bowie, Alice Cooper, Iggy Pop, and Black Sabbath. I mean, those are all evident. Manson's a towering figure to begin with. Rail thin, had long black hair, he would wear striped leggings or tiny shorts and take his shirt off, wear contacts. He has stage presence. And Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids shows were legendary. Music writer Sandy Torres spoke to the Broward Palm Beach New Times later on in 2004, and she would say, quote, you didn't know if they were going to have naked underage girls underneath the keyboards, or if Brian was going to strip and somebody was going to give him a blowjob on stage. In 1992, there was another local band called Jack Off Jill, headed by Jessica Fodera, now Adams. Their style would be considered riot goth, a mix of feminist riot girl and goth subcultures. Whereas I am not a Marilyn Manson fan in any capacity, now in my old age, I discovered some of my favorite bands via Marilyn Manson, like Switchblade Symphony, Susie and the Banshees. I even indirectly discovered The Cure via Marilyn Manson when I was a kid. And eventually the band Jack Off Jill, who they were not only friends with Manson, but they were coming up in South Florida together. And on a side note, because y'all know music is my life, music and film, that makes me who I am as a human being, pretty much completely. Jack Off Jill was fronted by an amazing woman They were one of my favorites growing up as a teenager. They eventually broke up, but Jessica later started a band called Scarling. And Scarling is my soundtrack for the fall. And I don't know about you guys, but I am already wanting to wear hoodies, drink pumpkin beer, play my fall music. But alas, it's over 100 degrees here with a feels like of somewhere around 111, 112 every day. So it's not quite fall yet. But that being said, Scarling is one of my favorite bands of all time, and I've been listening to them non-stop lately because I'm feeling the fall spirit internally. And y'all know it wouldn't be a We Saw the Devil episode if I didn't recommend some form of film or music. So, your recommendation for the day is Scarling. My favorite songs, in order, are City Noise, Hello London, and Bummer. And you are most welcome in advance because they are truly an awesome band, and for some reason, they just get me all into the fall vibe. But anyway, Jack Off Jill and Marilyn Manson, 1992. Jack Off Jill and Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids were coming up in South Florida together. Manson would ask Jack Off Jill to open for him in a small nightclub in Davie, Florida called the Plus 5 Lounge. And they would eventually go on tour with Marilyn Manson as a whole in 1993 and 1994. Manson, Jessica, and Jessica's boyfriend Jordy White became close friends, even starting a new band, a side project called Mrs. Scabtree, with Jessica doing vocals, her boyfriend Jordy playing guitar, and Marilyn Manson on drums. And Jack Off Jill also had a controversial show. Jessica would strip male fans so that the audience could taunt them, throw candy and drinks, spit on people. Later on, she would even cut herself live on stage, and that earned her the title Patron Saint of Self-Injury. And I've included a link in the show notes to a live song by Jack Off Jill in 1996, just to give you the vibe of what these shows were like. Again, had very similar type of vibes going in their shows. Had very similar audiences. Manson's stage show absolutely drew controversy. Whether it was a naked woman tied to a cross, shredded Bibles, Confederate or Nazi flags, his show made a statement and word began to spread. Both Marilyn Manson and Jessica were pretty much the top of the South Florida alternative goth scene. Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails would actually go on to sign Marilyn Manson to his Nothing record label in 1993. And it didn't take long for Brian Warner, aka Marilyn Manson, to have his first arrest. And that arrest came in December of 1994 while on tour with Jack Off Jill at a venue called Club 5 in Jacksonville, Florida. Both Jessica and Brian were arrested for violating the town's adult entertainment codes. The complaint read that Manson removed his pants, exposed himself, and masturbated on stage. He would later say that it was a prosthetic piece built into his underwear and that he was never exposed. Both Jessica and Brian were charged with misdemeanors and spent one night in jail before all charges were dropped. Jessica's boyfriend, Jordy White, would go on to join Marilyn Manson as their bassist and was given the name Twiggy Ramirez, whom, if you guys ever listened to Marilyn Manson, most of you likely know. In 1995, Brian Warner did an interview for Per magazine, and it's pretty gross. When asked to share some of the best stories that he had from the road, he replied, quote, "The best and most exciting stories on the road are better left a secret because of the statute of limitations." He then discussed the innocence and ignorance of fans who get caught up in the moment and then said, quote, "Anybody that gets into any exploitation is not someone who doesn't want to get taken advantage of." Later in the interview, he admitted, quote, "I've grown accustomed to getting sexual excitement out of a girl screaming. There's something about a terrified girl that I find exciting." First of all, that's pretty fucking gross. And can you imagine that being said in 2023 post Me Too? Second of all, that's the thing with Brian Warner and why he's such a paradox. Brian is incredibly intelligent. Watch any interview with him, particularly his 1997 appearance on Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect or 2001's interview with Bill O'Reilly. Warner is actually a really book-smart intellectual and knows the time and place of when to quote-unquote turn it on, like turn the Manson persona on. Bad press is still press. It drives up sales and interest. Was he really advocating for sexually assaulting fans? Or were his antics just mere ploys to increase record sales? Was he kind of a shock jock slash Howard Stern slash Alice Cooper of the early 2000s? No one knew, and that was part of the entire mystique. Now, the next event of note came in 1995 when Marilyn Manson was on tour. However, it only came to light recently in January of this year, just 7 months ago. A woman going by the name Jane Doe brought claims against Manson's former record labels, Interscope Music and Nothing Records, in a lawsuit filed in New York's Nassau County Supreme Court. She claimed that Brian Warner assaulted and raped her many times over the course of 4 years from 1995 to 1999, and that his bandmates and labels were aware of this behavior. The lawsuit is 36 pages and fully available online if you would like to check it out and read it. This woman claims that when she was 16, again in 1995, she went to a Marilyn Manson show. She says that Brian took her to the tour bus where he sexually assaulted her. He then told her to get the fuck off the bus. His team supposedly gave her a phone number and a secret login to an internet group so that she could have close contact with the band. Less than a week later, she supposedly started doing drugs, which spiraled into absolute addiction. She would then speak to Brian or his bandmates periodically, and then now claims that she was being groomed by them. She would travel to various Marilyn Manson concerts around the country and claims that she was sexually assaulted by him numerous times by giving her backstage access constantly. The lawsuit mentions the emotional and mental abuse that she endured, which went on for almost 4 years. This lawsuit was eventually dismissed. In 1996, Antichrist Superstar, Marilyn Manson's second album, debuted on the Billboard 200 at number 3, cruelly catapulting them into worldwide recognition. And disaffected teens everywhere, myself included, bought the album. Parents, pillars of the community, religious leaders, teachers, and conservatives immediately rallied against it like it was the worst thing to happen to America. In 1997, Ray Kuntz testified before a Senate subcommittee who was investigating the influence of violent song lyrics on youth. His 15-year-old son had committed suicide while listening to Antichrist Superstar.
Mr. Kuntz, you honor us by coming forward with your bravery to talk about this tragedy. Welcome to the committee, and I'd like to hear your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Brownback and members of the Senate Subcommittee. Thank you for extending the invitation to address you today, and a special thank you to you, Senator Conrad, for your kind introduction. For the record, my name is Raymond Kuntz, and our family calls Burlington, North Dakota home. I've traveled to Washington, D.C. from there today to speak to you all regarding an issue that has changed our lives forever: violent music's impact on our children. On the morning of December 12, 1996, as part of our family's normal daily behavior, my wife started our son's shower for him and then went to wake him. But Richard, our son, was not sleeping in his bed. He was dead. He had killed himself. Richard has left us, and he's never coming back. Please listen to what Richard heard as he died. Hear what was in his mind. The lyrics to Marilyn Manson's The Reflecting God from the CD titled Antichrist Superstar. Your world is an ashtray. We burn in coil like cigarettes. The more you cry, your ashes turn to mud. It's the nature of the leeches. The virgin's feeling cheated. You've only spent a second of your life. My world is unaffected. There is an exit here. I say it is, and then it's true. There is a dream inside a dream. I'm wide awake. The more I sleep, you'll understand when I'm dead. I went to God just to see, and I was looking at me, saw heaven and hell were lies. When I'm God, everyone dies. Scar, can you feel my power? Shoot here and the world gets smaller. Scar, 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 can you feel my power? One shot and the world gets smaller. Let's jump upon the sharp swords and cut away our smiles. Without the threat of death, there's no reason to live at all. My world is unaffected. There is an exit here. I say it is, and then it's true. There is a dream inside a dream. I'm wide awake. The more I sleep, you'll understand when I'm dead. Dear sirs, my son was listening to Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar on his stereo when he died. I personally removed that CD with the red lightning bolt on it from his player the next day, with the rough draft of an English class paper about this artist that had been returned to him that very day for final revisions on the stand next to his body. Richard's friends tell us that in the end, that this song, The Reflecting God, from that CD, was his favorite song. They say that this song was what he always seemed to be listening to whenever they came over. And the lyrics to that song read as an unequivocally direct inducement to take one's own life.
He said that music producers should be forced to attach labels to the albums to warn public officials, store managers, and parents about lyrics that contain themes of violence, sex, drugs, and death. He called Antichrist Superstar the, quote, hand grenade that killed his son. And even though this little-known meeting at the Senate subcommittee was just shown on C-SPAN, the effects were far-reaching, with CNN, Associated Press, and other large media channels discussing it. So again, Marilyn Manson got free press. Also at this time, Brian Warner began to date actress Rose McGowan. And this is right after she had been in 1996's breakout horror film Scream. And yes, that Rose McGowan, who would go on to become a vocal advocate for women's rights, notoriously speaking up about her own abuse at the hands of Harvey Weinstein. In February of 1998, Craig Marks, the editor of Spin magazine, filed harassment and assault charges against Brian Warner, accusing him of threatening his life after inviting him backstage at a New York concert. The lawsuit claimed that Manson's bodyguards grabbed him by the neck, threw him up against the wall, roughed him up a little bit, and that Brian Warner said, quote, "That's what you get when you disrespect me." Warner countersued for defamation, and then all of this was eventually settled out of court for an unknown sum of money. Late 1998 and early 1999, Manson was still dating actress Rose McGowan, and the two became engaged. And then on April 20th, 1999, a watershed moment in American history occurred: the shooting at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. 13 innocent students, plus the two perpetrators, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, would make 15 lives lost on that day. And seeing as though Manson had already become the poster child for everything that evangelical Christians, conservatives, and most parents hated, he stood for everything dark, gothic, black clothes, all of that. It was almost immediately, although incorrectly, stated that the shooters were fans of his music. People went out and burned his CDs. People were all over every news station talking about how it was the music. It was Marilyn Manson. It was Marilyn Manson. And Manson would be forced to cancel half of his tour that year due to threats from the uproar. In the year 2000, David M. Diaz, a security guard working one of Marilyn Manson's live shows, suddenly feels someone grab his head from the stage. It was Manson, using his head to hump and gyrate against. And Diaz would go on to sue Brian Warner, alleging battery and emotional distress. His ask of $75,000 apparently appeared like a cash grab, as this case actually went to a full jury trial and Warner was found not liable. In 2001, Keanu Reeves, yes, the beloved sweet angel baby Keanu Reeves, his girlfriend, Jennifer Syme, went to a party at Manson's home. There, Jennifer apparently got intoxicated and was eventually driven home by another partygoer. For whatever reason, Jennifer decided to return to the party, at least that's what everyone believed. She got into her Jeep Cherokee and began to make her way back to Manson's home. She ended up crashing into a parked row of cars at a high rate of speed, was ejected, and killed. Her mother, Maria St. John, would actually file a wrongful death suit against Manson, claiming that he provided her with all of the drugs and encouraged her to drive. Manson claimed that he actually sent a driver to drive her home, which is true, and that she took it upon herself to return. The lawsuit was dismissed, but Manson did settle the matter out of court for an unspecified sum. And 3 other things happened in 2001. First, Brian Warner and Rose McGowan break up. Secondly, he does the exact same freaking thing to another security guard who was working at one of his shows. He supposedly grabbed his head, humped it, and except this time, Manson pled no contest to assault, battery, and disorderly conduct. Joshua Kessler received $4,000, but then turned around and sued Warner for sexual assault and emotional duress. Once again, Warner found himself settling the matter outside of court, giving Kessler an unspecified cash settlement. That lawsuit was then ultimately dismissed. And lastly, he began dating the burlesque queen herself, Dita Von Teese, who is one of the most beautiful women in the world. They would go on to get married in 2005 before getting divorced in 2006, so they were together for almost 5 years. Directly after their separation, 38-year-old Warner would begin a relationship with 19-year-old Evan Rachel Wood, and this is where it begins to truly get dark. If you've seen the 2022 documentary by Wood called Phoenix Rising, you might know some of what she alleges happened to her at his hands. The documentary is currently available on both Hulu and Amazon, and I highly recommend it. And we're going to cover these allegations here in a moment. We're kind of covering everything as it happened in chronological order. In 2007, Marilyn Manson keyboardist Stephen Gregory Beard Jr., who went by the stage name Madonna Wayne Gacy, sued Warner claiming that he spent the band's revenue on personal purchases, including expensive jewelry, Nazi collectibles and memorabilia, and human skeletons. Beer would go on to receive almost $400,000 in a settlement. In November of 2008, Evan Rachel Wood confirmed to the media that she and Brian were no longer together. And then the infamous interview happened. Brian Warner told Spin magazine that after their breakup, he called Wood 158 times in one day, cutting himself with a razor blade each time she didn't answer his call, just to demonstrate how much pain that he was in. He then followed that up by, quote, "I have fantasies every day about smashing her skull in with a sledgehammer." And it didn't help his case that in 2009, the music video for the song Running to the Edge of the World dropped, and it features Manson beating a woman bloody. The actress looks just like, you guessed it, Evan Rachel Wood. And for whatever reason, I mean, y'all color me guilty, I've gotten back together with some shitbags too. Brian and Wood got back together in January of 2010. And Wood even accepted his marriage proposal live on stage at a Marilyn Manson concert in Paris. 8 months later, by August, their engagement was canceled and the couple broke up for the final time. But Wood and Warner still casually saw each other. And unbeknownst to a lot of people, Wood actually ended up getting pregnant with Brian Warner's baby in early 2011 and got an abortion. In May of 2010, he asked Ashley Walters, a LA area photographer, to be his personal assistant. This will be important later. In November of 2016, Evan Rachel Wood opened up to Rolling Stone magazine and shared that she had been raped, stating that she had endured, quote, physical, psychological, sexual abuse at the hands of a former partner. Everyone, and I mean everyone, speculated that she was referencing Marilyn Manson, but she had been very careful about, at that point, not divulging names. The following year, in October of 2017, Jessica Adams of Jack Off Jill came forward and released a statement that Geordie White, Marilyn Manson's guitarist, had physically abused and raped her during their relationship in the early 90s. And I have to say that I am so incredibly proud of her for doing so. Full transparency, I've been in a very small, hidden, invite-only Facebook group for a handful of years now. It was created by Jessica 8 years ago for the Jack Off Jill fans to kind of congregate, talk about the band, life, share music, art, etc. It started off with a lot of the OG Jack Off Jill fans, Scarling fans, and industry, and people that she knew. Well, Jessica was very open about the impending announcement, and watching what she went through in damn near real time was fucking heartbreaking. Her statement hit MSNBC, CNN, Huffington Post, literally every single music publication basically in existence. It blew up. And with that came the trolls. People began to harass her online. She was doxxed multiple times. Her accounts were hacked. She was repeatedly called a liar and an abuser herself. And I'm not going to speak for any survivor, as that is not my place. But I don't think that she would mind if I said that it was an incredibly difficult experience for her. Hundreds of trolls rallied against her, not to mention constant tags from enraged Marilyn Manson fans. And that's an accusation against a guitarist in Manson's band. Not even an accusation against Brian Warner himself. And people wonder why women are frightened to come forward against the likes of the Harvey Weinsteins, the Jeffrey Epsteins, and Brian Warners of the world. Powerful men with unlimited connections and unlimited funding by huge corporations or record labels. Brian Warner alone millions of fans across the globe worship his music and him to some degree, almost to the status of a god. None of us like seeing our heroes accused of vile things, but like, y'all, if Robert Smith, Ethel Cain, or Chelsea Wolfe were ever accused of vile things, you bet your sweet baby Jeebus that I would be rethinking where I spent my money. That's kind of the sane thing to do. I'm not going to get into a debate on separating the art for the artist or anything like that. I'm just saying that harassing survivors who come forward 20 years later and talk about their violent rape is not a good look, and you're not doing whatever musician you worship any favors, because they're not going to see that. Who is, however, going to see it is family, friends, loved ones who see you putting down someone who had the courage to come forward about trauma. Don't do it. In any case, it was super heartbreaking to see the backlash against Jessica, not only from online trolls, but also some well-known people in the industry as well. On February 27th of 2018, Evan Rachel Wood testified in front of the House committee advocating in favor of the proposed Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights Act. She once again brought up the fact that she was previously raped by an intimate partner that she trusted, and then discussed the various diagnoses that she had, like PTSD, depression, agoraphobia, and all of those happened as a result of that relationship.
My name is Evan Rachel Wood, and I'm an artist, but I'm also a domestic violence and sexual assault survivor and the single mother of a young boy. When I was 5 years old, I started working in film, and every day since then, I've worked to reach the very privileged place I'm aware that I occupy. And I'm here today to use my position as an artist, survivor, mother, and advocate to bring a human voice to the population of 25 million survivors in the U.S. who are currently experiencing inequality under the law and who desperately need basic civil rights. I struggle to speak to you today because I'm not sure what words are appropriate when discussing this issue. However, if you can't hear the whole truth, you will never know true empathy, and I believe in the saying, if we have to live through it, then you should have to hear it. There are two specific instances of sexual assault and violence I've experienced that really stick out in my mind. In fact, they are burned into my brain, branded there for life, a mental scar that I feel every day. My experience with domestic violence was this: toxic mental, physical, and sexual abuse, which started slow but escalated over time, including threats against my life, severe gaslighting and brainwashing, waking up to the man that claimed to love me raping what he believed to be my unconscious body. And the worst part, sick rituals of binding me up by my hands and feet to be mentally and physically tortured until my abuser felt I had proven my love for them. In this moment, while I was tied up and being beaten and being told unspeakable things, I truly felt like I could die, not just because my abuser said to me, I could kill you right now, but because in that moment I felt like I left my body and I was too afraid to run. He would find me. I froze. And it was as if I could see myself from the outside, and for the first time in months, I felt something, utter shame and despair. I had no idea what to do to change my situation, so I went numb, and soon I couldn't feel anything. I wasn't alive. My self-esteem and spirit were broken. I was deeply terrified, and that fear lives with me to this day. What makes me more hurt and more angry than the actual rape and abuse itself was that piece of me that was stolen, which altered the course of my life. Because of this abuse, my already spiritless person, when I was pushed onto the floor of a locked storage closet by another attacker after hours at a bar, my body instinctively knew what to do: disappear, go numb, make it go away. Being abused and raped previously made it easier for me to be raped again, not the other way around. And not a day goes by when I don't hear the words this man whispered into my ear over and over: you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine. And then my small voice sang back, no, 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 until it faded into nothing. And I remember the feeling of shutting down or freezing and utter shock taking over, and I couldn't even make a sound. I felt a piece of me disappear, a piece that has never returned. In other words, I was not fine, and I am not fine. So often we speak of these assaults as no more than a few minutes of awfulness, but the scars last a lifetime. Even though these experiences happened a decade ago, I still struggle with the aftermath. My relationship suffers, my partners suffer, my mental and physical health suffers. 7 years after my rapes, plural, I was diagnosed with long-term PTSD, which I had been living with all that time without knowledge about my condition. I simply thought I was going crazy. I struggled with depression, addiction, agoraphobia, night terrors. So many times a sleeping partner of mine has awoken to their love screaming in the night and gasping for air in a pool of sweat after having some sort of vivid dream of my abuse or hearing them say my name so loudly in my ear. The feeling of paralysis returns when there's a loud noise and I'm home alone, convinced someone is coming to hurt me. I stay awake all night clutching a baseball bat, which began to replace my distraught and absent partners as trust and touch became increasingly more difficult. I struggled with self-harm to the point of 2 suicide attempts, which landed me in a psychiatric hospital for a short period of time. And this was, however, a turning point in my life when I started seeking professional help to deal with my trauma and mental stress, but others are not so fortunate, and because of this, rape is often more than a few minutes of trauma, but a slow death. And this bill is just one step in the right direction of setting the bar higher for what's right and what the standard will be that we set for society. This, the recognition of basic civil rights for sexual assault survivors serves as a first step. It's a safety net that may help save someone's life one day. And even though we passed this bill at a federal level, there's still work to be done. And in order to ensure that all survivors are protected under that law, we need to pass the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights in all 50 states. We've done this in 9 so far, and it's our job to make sure that survivors in the remaining 41 are treated with the same humanity and dignity. And this is called progress, and it starts here.
Her testimony was highly publicized because, yet again, most of the world wondered if she was referencing Marilyn Manson. In May of 2018, a woman filed a police report against Brian Warner for unspecified sex crimes dating back to 2011, claiming that he held her captive for 48 hours and assaulted her. The district attorney declined to take on the case because not only had the statute of limitations expired, but there was the, quote, absence of corroboration. And here's where you really begin to see the beginning of the shitstorm that was about to befall Marilyn Manson. Esme Bianco of Game of Thrones fame makes an Instagram post in March of 2019 stating that she was a survivor of domestic violence from a previous boyfriend. Now, Esme met Manson on the set of an unreleased music video and began dating him in 2011. And this is as she was starting to be recognized from her role as Ross on Game of Thrones. The following month, Evan Rachel Wood testified in front of the California State Senate's Public Safety Committee, advocating for the passage of the Phoenix Act, legislation that would extend the statute of limitations in California when certain criteria were met, like multiple accusers must come forward, new evidence could be unearthed, or domestic violence and assault were the primary complaints. Just 3 months later, Esme Bianco would also go on to testify in support of the act, which would be passed and signed into law in October. During the 2020 COVID lockdown, Brian Warner married again, this time Lindsay Usick, a well-known artist and photographer. Nicolas Cage was a guest through FaceTime. It was held in Manson's backyard and only had 5 people present. And then on February 1st, 2021, Evan Rachel Wood took to Instagram and publicly named Brian Warner, aka Marilyn Manson, as her abuser. Her post said, quote, "The name of my abuser is Brian Warner, also known to the world as Marilyn Manson. He started grooming me when I was a teenager and horrifically abused me for years. I was brainwashed and manipulated into submission. I am done living in fear of retaliation, slander, or blackmail. I am here to expose this dangerous man and call out the many industries that have enabled him before he ruins any more lives. I stand with the many victims who will no longer be silent." And the world exploded. Cable news exploded. Online blogs exploded. Twitter, everything. Manson fans rallied and hurled an absolute tidal wave of abuse at Evan Rachel Wood, which was super disheartening to witness. Likewise, though, a lot of people believed her. The next day, on February 2nd, 4 more women came forward to accuse Manson of abuse. One woman using a pseudonym, model Sarah McNeely, Ashley Smithline, and Ashley Walters, Manson's personal assistant. The internet was on fire, and everyone took notice, but initially looked to Manson and his previous girlfriends and partners for statements. I believe Rose McGowan was one of the first to release a statement, and she said, quote, "When he was with me, he was not like that, but that has no bearing on whether he was like that with others before or after. It takes time to come forward, and again, I am proud of these women and anybody who stands against an abuser." Dita Von Teese, whom Brian was with for 5 years, said, quote, "Please know that the details made public do not match my personal experience with our 7 years together as a couple. Had they, I would not have married him in December of 2005. Abuse has no place in any relationship. This will be my sole statement on the matter. And it didn't stop there. Anna Paquin, Will Wheaton, Alana Glazer, countless more, and even Amber Heard all came out in support of Evan Rachel Wood. Phoebe Bridgers even tweeted a story about how she visited Manson's house when she was a teenager, and she said he had a rape room. She tweeted, quote, "I went to Marilyn Manson's house when I was a teenager with some friends. I was a big fan. He referred to a room in his house as a rape room. I thought it was just his horrible frat boy sense of humor. I stopped being a fan." Wes Borland, the guitarist from Limp Bizkit, who eventually played with Manson, said in an interview with Metal Hammer, quote, "I was there when he was with Evan Rachel Wood. I was at his house. It's not fucking cool, and that's all I'm going to say about it." Less than 24 hours after Evan Rachel Woods' allegations dropped, Brian Warner found himself without an agent, a record label, and a management company. A couple days later, on February 6th, Corey freaking Feldman, Corey came out and said that Manson had been obsessed with him for decades, including stalking and harassing him. He said that it began back in 1997 when he met Manson at Howard Stern's Private Parts film debut in New York City. Feldman said, quote, "He grabbed my face in front of the crowd and kissed me with his black lipstick that I couldn't rub off all night." Ellie Roswell from the band Wolf Alice came out in support of Wood, saying, "I met Marilyn backstage at a festival a few years ago. After his compliments towards my band became more and more hyperbolic, I became suspicious of his behavior. I was shocked to look down and see he was filming up my skirt with a GoPro." A little over a week later, Bianca Esme also posted a statement on Instagram naming Manson as her abuser. She began to do interviews, including this one with The Cut. In this interview, she claimed that Brian had inflicted cuts and bruises that left permanent scars on her body while they were living together in his home. She says that he chased her with an axe and would repeatedly play her sex scenes from Game of Thrones in front of visiting guests just to humiliate her. She said, "I basically felt like a prisoner. I came and went at his pleasure. Who I spoke to was completely controlled by him. I called my family hiding in the closet." Just another week later, more than a dozen women had come forward and accused Brian Warner of abuse and/or sexual assault. And then there were people who witnessed it from the sidelines. Singer Otep Shemaya, whom I absolutely adore, also put out a statement claiming that Brian Warner's current wife, Lindsay Usick, was being abused by him as well. Her statement said, quote, "The last warning, unpopular opinion coming. Hey everyone, okay, I've been getting a lot of requests regarding my thoughts on Manson. I don't normally discuss personal stuff, but since all this evidence is coming out that he sexually and physically assaulted a number of women and minors, not to mention being a sexist and a Nazi sympathizer, I've decided to tell you what I know. I was a huge fan of his. I even wore his shirt on Ozfest when people were blaming him for Columbine. And I've met him many times. We have mutual friends, including Gene Simmons' son, Nick Simmons. Manson even told one of my fans he was afraid of me, which I took as a huge compliment. But then I dated a woman who was friends with his current wife, Lindsay, and her twin sister, who's married to James Eha of A Perfect Circle. And Lindsay used to call our house in the early hours, and I was told she was hysterical because he was on another drug binge, threatening her life, throwing knives at her that stuck in the wall, and verbally assaulting her. We offered many times to have her come to mine because he would never come face me with that bullshit. But sadly, she wouldn't leave him. So my ex would be calm and talk her down until Manson realized that she was on the phone and he woed down. But then he started calling in the early hours. I was told that he was paranoid, gacked out of his mind, and accusing his wife of cheating with an imaginary person who had blonde hair with a blonde mustache named Dawn, who he, I'm told, saw on his security cameras and was, quote, fucking his wife. Look, this is heartbreaking for all the women he's hurt, but also for all the fans who always had his back, like me. But he's not the Luciferian evil everyone thinks he is. He's just a violent junkie who chooses to bully and, according to reports, physically and sexually attacks women that he thinks are weaker than he is. I say, may he rot. In April, May, and June of 2021, a couple different moves are made. Esme Bianco filed a lawsuit against Manson, claiming sexual battery and sexual assault. According to that lawsuit, she claimed that Brian Warner deprived her of sleep, food, and filled her with drugs and alcohol. She says that she was locked in a bedroom, whipped, forcibly given electric shocks, and threatened with rape. Esme also said that Manson violated human trafficking laws by bringing her to California from Britain under the false pretense of work. Ashley Walters, his longtime personal assistant, also filed a lawsuit for battery, assault, and harassment. Model Ashley Smithline followed suit in June, claiming that Manson locked her in rooms, raped her, cut her, and repeatedly told her, quote, "You can't rape someone that you're in love with." She also went on to say, quote, "I have bonded with the 5 other Maine girls who went through this, and we have found such a strength in numbers. And our stories are all fucking identical. It's disgusting." Jane Doe also filed a lawsuit against Manson, claiming that she briefly dated him in 2011 and that he showed her a video called Groupie. It was supposedly filmed in Los Angeles in 1996, and she claims that on that tape, there is what appears to be a teenage girl fan is crying while Brian Warner holds a gun to her face and forces her to drink a glass of urine. An unnamed friend of Brian's would later claim that, yeah, that video did exist, but instead of just some random teenage fan being abused, it was actually a scripted short film. This particular victim would also claim that Brian raped her when she returned her house key to him when they broke up. Jane Doe's lawsuit would go on to be dismissed in September due to the fact that repressed memories or quote-unquote delayed discovery weren't factors that could extend the statute of limitations. And at this time, the list of women grew to more than 15. Then suddenly, New Hampshire came out of the gate with an active warrant for Brian Warner from an instance that took place back in 2019 where he spit near and on a videographer at one of his concerts. Brian would turn himself in at the Guilford Police Department in New Hampshire in early July. He pled not guilty. Now, when all of this news originally broke, Rolling Stone magazine, who occasionally does put out some killer pieces of journalism, they interviewed over 9 months more than 55 people who were close to Brian Warner / Marilyn Manson at one point in his life. They also interviewed model Sarah McNeely. So, what did Brian's acquaintances say? Nothing good. Almost everyone described his apartment as dark, macabre. Some people said that there were vaginas everywhere. The word AIDS was spray painted above his bed. The entire apartment was decorated with blood, swastikas, and clipped photos from vintage porn magazines. Most of the people interviewed had really nothing nice to say. On January 23rd, 2022, Phoenix Rising, Evan Rachel Wood's documentary about her entire experience, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. There, the world learned more about the allegations that Manson raped her during a music video for the song Heart-Shaped Glass. Wood claims that she and Brian had discussed doing a simulated sex scene, but that he gave her a glass of absinthe and that as soon as the cameras began rolling and filming began, he penetrated her and began to have sex with her in front of a room filled with people. She claims that she did not consent to that. In March of 2022, just a couple weeks before Phoenix Rising premieres on HBO, Brian Warner sued Evan Rachel Wood and her BFF, Ilma Gore, for defamation. Warner claims that using the documentary film that they were working on, that it was a setup. The lawsuit states, quote, "For at least the last 2 years, Gore and Wood have secretly recruited, coordinated, and pressured prospective accusers to emerge simultaneously with allegations of rape and abuse against Warner." May of 2022, Ashley Walters' lawsuit was dismissed by a Los Angeles Superior Court judge, citing the statute of limitations as the reason. Those incidents stemmed from events that occurred in 2010 and 2011. September 20th of 2022, the LA County Sheriff's Department ended their 19-month investigation into Brian Warner and then sent all of their findings off to the DA's office. And even at this time now, in August of 2023, it's unknown if there are any charges coming from that investigation. January of this year saw Esme Bianco settle outside of court with Manson for an undisclosed sum of money. She said that she just wanted to continue on with her life and not be traumatized any longer. And in a shocking turn of events, in late February of 23, Ashley Smithline recanted her lawsuit and allegations. Not only that, but she tried to testify for Brian Warner in his lawsuit against Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore. And remember, this is the same person that was like, I'm so glad that I've become so close with Evan Rachel Wood and the 5 other girls, the main 5 of us. Their strength in numbers, blah, blah, blah. Same person. She then said in February, quote, I never intended to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Warner and have no intention now or ever pursuing criminal charges, as Mr. Warner did not ever assault or abuse me. Looking back, I feel I was manipulated by Miss Wood, Miss Gore, Miss Bianco, and Mr. Elwinger to spread publicly false accusations of abuse against Mr. Warner. I succumbed to pressure from Evan Rachel Wood and her associates to make accusations of rape and assault against Manson that were not true. Of course, a spokesperson for Evan Rachel Wood immediately released a statement that said, quote, Evan never pressured or manipulated Ashley. It was Ashley who first contacted Evan about the abuse she suffered. It's unfortunate that the harassment and threats Ashley received after filing her federal lawsuit appear to have pressured her to change her testimony. That all being said, a judge did deny the application to amend and admit Ashley Smith's line new motion, basically her recanting everything. And multiple pieces of Brian Warner's defamation lawsuit were also thrown out by a judge. So, TLDR, Evan Rachel Wood was handed some wins. Brian Warner's defamation lawsuit, some of the core pieces, the judge that was bullshit. We're going to take that out. And that's where this entire situation currently stands, you guys. There is a lot more to come, and it is likely going to go on trial at some point unless there is an out-of-court settlement, which does seem to be Brian Warner's MO. At this time, no charges have been filed against him by the LA District Attorney's Office. And yeah, that's pretty much where it currently stands. What do you guys think? For me, it's not even a question. We believe all victims in this house. And no, that doesn't mean that I'm saying that Brian Warner is 100% guilty of everything that he's being accused of. When the FBI has put the number of unfounded rapes, and by unfounded, that means those determined to be false after investigation, at 8%. 8%. 8%. And in a country where it's estimated that up to 77% of sexual assaults go unreported, there's no doubt in my mind that survivors should be supported in every way imaginable. Where there's smoke, there is usually fire. And when you have more than 20 women coming out against someone, I'm sorry, the statistics show that it's incredibly likely that there is a great deal of validity to those allegations. And the company you keep too. I know people, especially people in kind of like the horror world, I know that people are loving Nicolas Cage, but Nick Cage has been accused of domestic violence by multiple women that he's been in relationships with. That's just a fact. It's also a fact that Johnny Depp did, in fact, abuse Amber Heard. What's in question, though, is just how severe it was, and then also her own role in abuse against Johnny Depp. And don't forget the text messages that surfaced in the Johnny Depp trial about them talking about, killing her, and I hope she dies and rots and her corpse is fucked and all this awful stuff, which I've gone through some pretty nasty breakups, and I don't text my friends that way. Not like I'm the morality police on things that I say about people, but that's kind of gross. And that's pretty much where the update of this is. The last Marilyn Manson concert was June 22nd of this year, and since then, to my knowledge, he's more or less been laying low with his wife. He was supposed to go on tour with Rob Zombie starting this month, but Alice Cooper ended up taking the spot. He is not going to be going on tour. So I assume that there's probably going to be a lot more coming out of this. It's turning into a really, really, really nasty case of he said, she said, and it's just heartbreaking for everyone involved. But that's it for today, guys. Did you expect more allegations, like more arrests, more heinous arrests or interesting arrests from Marilyn Manson? Is this almost exactly what you thought it would be? I left out a good bit of content, like in terms of his autobiography that he wrote years ago. It was so filled with lies and exaggerations. And again, that's been one of Marilyn Manson's biggest tools, is that he knows how to utilize media, even negative media, in order to get clicks. And his autobiography was no different. He was close friends with Jessica Adams of Jack Off Jill back in the early 90s. And then he reduced her to a groupie in his autobiography. He also claims that he and Trent Reznor sexually assaulted an unconscious girl as well, which Trent Reznor has come out and said, nope, that never happened, and distanced himself more than 20 years ago. But in any case, I can't imagine Evan Rachel Wood going through this on such a public stage. It has to be absolutely terrifying. Based on all of the stories that have come out regarding Marilyn Manson's vindictiveness and retaliatory behaviors, I simply cannot imagine. But that's it for this episode, y'all. Next episode is going to be Chris Chan coming out on Saturday. We're going to continue that insane story, and it's still blowing my mind that you guys are really enjoying that show. As I said in the last episode, never in a million years did I think that the true crime demographic would be interested in a story about Chris Chan, but so many of you are just completely enthralled by the entire thing. It is quite literally like a train wreck that you can't look away from. It's heinous. So the next episode will be coming out on Saturday. Until next crime.